So many of you guys requested me to cover this phone. It's crazy. So today we're taking a look at it. This is the Sony XPERIA 1 Mark V, and I had a chance to shoot with this while I was at Sony Condo last week in Utah. So I shot portraits, I shot landscapes, I shot a lot of video, but I mostly shot a lot of vertical video for Instagram. And now I kind of regret that for this review because most of my video samples are in vertical. But if you're not following me over on Instagram, make sure to do that because you would have saw most of the video coming off this phone. I always feel like Sony Xperia phones don't really get the love they deserve because Sony kind of markets these phones in a weird way, and especially here in North America, I know they don't really do that well, but I'm happy they exist because no one else is doing what they're doing in this phone, like having full manual controls. Like, this is a different experience, it's a different UI. It's like using a Sony Alpha camera really, and you know, you also have the ability to shoot S-Cinetone picture profile in your video, as well as 4K 120 frames per second across all the cameras on the back of this phone. Okay, so speaking of S-Cinetone, I'm actually thinking of switching over to this phone now as the main camera so you can see how it looks in this type of scenario and kind of see how it looks side by side with the A7 IV because that's what I'm shooting on right now in S-Cinetone. All right, so I got them kind of matched up here. This is the XPERIA 1 Mark V and this is the A7 IV. They're both in S-Cinetone, same white balance, same shutter speed, same everything. And this is kind of what it looks like. You can see it's got face tracking. The A7 IV also has tracking on as well. So obviously the sensor sizes aren't comparable, but at least you can get kind of a similar look. So I'm just gonna switch over to the phone now and finish the rest of the video on the phone. All right, so we're fully switched over here. What I like about the Pro Video app on this phone is that you actually have full control over the same settings and dialed in like a real camera. The only thing is it doesn't have S-Log3 or 10-bit video like it would on some of these other Sony cameras, but we do have S-Cinetone, which is pretty cool, and this is what it looks like, and this is basically what I shoot all my YouTube videos in this picture profile, and it's cool that there's a phone to match it now. All right, so the camera system in the Xperia 1 Mark V is a 24mm f1.9 48 megapixel quad Bayer sensor, and that bins down to 12 megapixels. You've got the 16mm ultra wide f2.2 12 megapixel camera, as well as the 85 to 125 periscope telephoto zoom, and that's f2.3 to f2.8. While I was shooting portraits on this phone, I just found myself sticking to that 85 to 125mm periscope telephoto zoom lens instead of using portrait mode, because I found the portrait mode on this phone to be very hit or miss, and I just felt safer using that telephoto lens. And kind of like on most Androids, you can turn any image into a portrait mode shot afterwards in the editor. So that's kind of what I did, and I feel like it looks better, and that's something I would actually do on a Google Pixel phone as well. This phone's also really snappy, and I never had any issues with overheating. It's got that new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and I was shooting photos in the sun, I was shooting video, I was screen recording, all this stuff at the same time, never had it overheat on me. That said, they say it has 60% better heat dissipation than the Mark IV, and it's just more efficient with that new processor. I really love the back texture of this phone. It's really cool. I also love that it has a thin profile and that also has a really thin camera bump compared to most phones these days. On the side, there's the power button with the fingerprint reader, a shutter button, which only really works when you're in landscape, and a volume rocker, which also doubles as a zoom rocker when taking photos and video. On the bottom, you'll find the USB-C port, as well as a SIM and a micro SD card slot. Yes, you can actually drop a 1 terabyte micro SD card into this phone to expand the storage, which is becoming kind of rare. And something that's also rare is that this phone also has a headphone jack. The display is really nice. It's 6.5 inches, 4K 120 Hertz OLED, and it looks incredible. So as I mentioned, this phone is at its best when you're shooting in full manual mode. Of course, they have a basic mode, which is more like full auto, point and shoot, kind of like an iPhone. Just let it figure it out for you and it does the shot. But I feel like shooting full manual is where this phone is at. You can be way more creative with it, just like you could with a real camera. The UI is very similar to what you get on a Sony mirrorless camera. And it's even cool that they've got touch tracking as well. It has real-time autofocus, which is something I've never seen in a phone before. And that's something you'd also find in a Sony mirrorless camera. When it comes to video, I was obviously impressed with the look out of this phone, and I was more impressed with the Pro Video app. It's really awesome. And one of the huge reasons I was impressed with this phone is that it doesn't jump into HDR. So if you're shooting in S-Cinetone, it stays in S-Cinetone. So it'll basically match the look of a real camera, and that's something I really love. Now, I know some people love that crazy HDR video and photos, but it's nice to know that you have the option in this phone to shoot without that look. The phone can also shoot 24, 30, 60, 120 frames per second in 4K on all the cameras, except the front camera. You can only shoot up to 60 frames per second. And it also has a slow motion mode, which is similar to like S&Q, where it'll actually record the video and output a slow motion video. And there's a lot of other features like portrait video mode, which only works in 1080p. Not gonna recommend that. You might wanna stay away from that. They also have product showcase mode, which is a really cool feature on this phone, something found on their bigger mirrorless cameras as well. So if you're presenting a product to the camera, you can hold it up and it'll focus on that product. And when you pull it back, it'll focus back to your face. So that's a really nice feature to have if that's something you do. Now they also have a Cinema Pro app as well, and it's completely different. It's got a different UI and different settings. Basically, they have this Sony Venice color profile, which is their highest end cinema camera they make. So they've kind of emulated that look in the phone, and it looks okay, but the only thing is you have to shoot in a wide aspect ratio, and I know some people feel like that looks more cinematic, but I personally wouldn't shoot in this mode because that's not really what I want. So if you want to know more about that, you have to watch someone else's video because I didn't cover this app. One other really awesome thing about this phone is that you can actually use it as an external monitor for your camera. So using HDMI to USB-C, you can actually connect any camera up to this phone, not just a Sony camera, and use it as an external monitor. You can also connect it via USB-C to some of Sony's newer cameras as well, and that'll actually let you live stream directly from the camera into the phone using the phone's data connection. And I also noticed a lot of people at Kando were using Sony XPERIA phones as monitors because it's so light and thin, has built-in battery, incredible display, and it's pretty cool for an external monitor. But I actually shot a more in-depth video on that, so that's going to be coming soon. So obviously I've been pretty positive on this phone, and I do think it's great, but there are a lot of quirks. One of the biggest quirks is that every time you change lenses on the phone, the ISO actually changes. So when you're in manual mode and you're set to your lowest ISO, it's going to jump. So the main camera is 64 ISO, the telephoto lens is 100 ISO, and the ultra wide is 160 ISO. So it's kind of weird. If you were in auto, you'd never notice this, but in full manual, you're going to see the ISO change. When it comes to low light and night mode, I didn't shoot a lot on this phone, but I will recommend you shoot on the main camera because that's actually the best over the ultra wide or the telephoto when it comes to low light. If you want to see a video on low light with this phone, I can shoot one of those because I actually get to hold on to this phone for a little bit longer. All right, and the last quirk is when you shoot above 30 frames per second, you actually lose the ability to have what they call high quality stabilization. And it is drastically noticeable. I noticed it when I was shooting in 60 frames per second that a lot of stuff I shot looked significantly more shaky compared to the stuff I was shooting at 24 frames per second. And it just kind of jumps to a standard stabilization and not a high quality stabilization. This phone is also pretty expensive compared to the competition, but I also feel like this phone is in its own world. It's separate from Apple, Samsung, and Google. I know that most Android phones have a pro photography mode that lets you manually control the camera, but not like Sony's doing it. This is a little bit different. And I think that if I was to recommend this phone to anyone, it would be someone who's looking to buy like a small point and shoot camera like a Sony ZV-1, but also wants a good phone. And I feel like this phone is so niche. Like it was made for people like me, like photographers and people that want like all these manual controls. And it's very evident since you can literally use this as an external monitor for your Sony camera. And I can appreciate that someone's making a phone like this, especially for photographers, but it's such a small niche market that I don't feel like this phone's going to appeal to everybody. Anyway, what do you guys think about this phone? Have you been interested in getting one? Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed everything I shot on this phone. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give it a thumbs down twice. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. It's a video. I did my best. Shoot with this thing at Sony Kando in 5 review. In the thing, vertical video now, and that monitor just turned off behind me, so that's fun. Portrait telescopo, 8 Snapdragons, 8 gens. Video in the is where this camera shine, or when the phone, it's not a camera, because it doesn't jump into HDR. Change the ISO, nope. Pro photography, wow.